Little Caesars Pizza.
Super Tuesday starts with a big one in the ACC at 7 p.m. Eastern. The number 10 Tar Heels take on number 18 Clemson. Then Vandy battles Kentucky. Both games on ESPN and the ESPN app. And our next NBA Wednesday doubleheader has Kyrie and the Celtics hosting the Unicorn and the Knicks at 8 p.m. Eastern. Then the Mavs take on the Suns. Our coverage tips with NBA Countdown at 7, also on the app if you are on the go. Speaking of the NBA, Blake Griffin has a new home after being traded to the Pistons, and the Clippers are reportedly still trying to see if they can move DeAndre Jordan and Lou Williams. Max, I'll start with you. Whose fault was the failure of Lob City in LA?
It was Doc Rivers, the GM. Not Doc Rivers, the coach, Doc Rivers, the GM. Mentioned it earlier in the show. He inherited a team that was on its way. He was seen as an upgraded coach for obvious reasons over Vinny Del Negro. He was given a huge job with a lot of money and a ton of responsibility, and he failed in his responsibility as a GM. There are several examples of this, including if you have Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan and CP3, you need to surround them with shooters, of course. You need to figure out a way to make that work, or else move one of those big pieces while they have tremendous trade value to better get pieces that fit together. Doc Rivers did neither of those things. Yes, he tried to find shooting, but he used Eric Bledsoe. On my star system, that guy is what, a 3.5 to 4-star player at least, right? An all-star-ish player, a starter at least, or better than that. And he broke it into, what was it, Jared Dudley? Like, he was looking for shooting, and he got 2 nickels for a dime, which you never do in the NBA. You try to find those complementary pieces without using a more blue-chip piece to go get them. So that was a major mistake. He also obviously showed nepotism in terms of his relationship with his son. I mean, Austin Rivers was a 1-star guy, meaning replacement level, who, because of endless opportunity with Doc, became maybe a 2-star guy, meaning a rotation piece. He's obviously not starting caliber. And he was given, chance after chance, and eventually $12 million a year, which is much more than you pay a rotation piece. And I think that bothered people. But the bigger picture is, other than the inability to get the pieces to fit the right way, though he inherited an enormous amount of talent, it's when you give one man that much power and they can't figure out a way quite to make it work, then they have to at least have the kind of personality that doesn't breed resentment. And clearly, Doc has bred resentment, who, by the way, I admire Doc a lot. Love Doc as a point guard for the Knicks, loved him, and love him as a coach. But he was given so much power, maybe too much, that it backfired and has caused resentment, as Stephen A. Smith has pointed out earlier in the program. All around the league, you hear from different corners, players who have played for Doc Rivers, them bad-mouthing Doc. And why is that? So I believe the number one reason is the added responsibility and his failure as a GM.
I'm not going to absolve Doc Rivers completely, but I don't put most of the blame on him. I put most of the blame on Blake Griffin. This is the sport of basketball. If this were football where coaching is far more valuable, it would be different. This is basketball where talent usurps everything. And the Clippers clearly had some talent on their squad. CP3 is showing us that as a miniature point guard, he's a generational kind of player. He's just that elite of a floor general. He's somebody that's capable of leading you, even though he hasn't been to a conference finals or an NBA finals. 6 feet without the ability to play above the rim, isn't a scoring dynamo like an Allen Iverson or somebody. As a floor general, Chris Paul is one of the most special point guards to have ever played the game of basketball. You have him. You have a Skywalker in DeAndre Jordan. Not an offensive player, but there to catch alley-oops, block shots, rebound. He did that job. So what's the ingredient? What's the missing factor here? It's Blake Griffin. Now, Blake Griffin is a career 21-9 player. We know that. He's good for that on a night-in, night-out basis. He does the same in the playoffs, by the way, as well. But he's been hurt in the playoffs three of the last 5 years that they played in the postseason, not to mention the fact that when crunch time really arrives, he's been hard to find. We know he can play. Nobody's questioning his skills. but there have been times where his toughness has been questioned. Max Kellerman, Chauncey Billups once came on First Take before you arrived and questioned it openly as a former teammate of his. Never questioning his skill, never questioning his abilities, but questioning where are you when the time really arrives to get it done. He was a Skywalker once upon a time. He can still play above the rim. He'll yam it on you and what have you. But there was a time when we looked at Blake Griffin as a generational talent. Now we look at him as just a really, really damn good basketball player. But he's not the one that you want to give the ball to and say, take me to the promised land. When you have DeAndre Jordan and Chris Paul, the one ingredient that you're missing is somebody that you can say, here, take me to the promised land when the game gets tight. And that was not Blake Griffin.
Question. If you are Doc Rivers, the GM, and you have absolute control and you have a very willing owner who will spend money, he's left it up to you, right? And you're also the coach. And you see that in Blake, because Blake, it's also partly just the way he's built. He's not a long, lanky dude like Kevin Durant, right, who's going to be able to play defense the same way, even if he wants to, not built like a defender, really. He can put the ball on the floor. He's kind of a tweener in a weird era, not a great outside shooter, but he shoots well enough. He's just, his skills package is such that he's something less than a Kevin Durant, but he's more than most all-stars. But if you're Doc Rivers and a talent evaluator, and you're looking and you see that piece needs to be a little better, go make a deal, man. There are guys moving teams all over the place. The Clippers are not a desirable location. That's the failure of Doc Rivers' GM. That's one. Two, Chris Paul's a generational talent. DeAndre Jordan has value, etc. Blake Griffin now. You mentioned earlier in the show, Chris Paul's bad-mouthing him. Matt Barnes, several other players who have played for the Clippers, they're all bad-mouthing Doc. You know, I mean, so that's the commonality there. That's
well, I didn't say Chris Paul badmouthed him. I said Chris Paul left $200 million on the table not to play for him, which is worse.
That says enough.
Okay, but obviously, what are they pointing to in L.A. right now? People are pointing to Doc, and maybe that's even Doc the coach. But my question is, isn't that incumbent upon Doc Rivers, the GM, to identify what you're saying in Blake Griffin and move him for something good?
Well, you could say that, but at the end of the day, if other people notice it about Blake, what are they going to be willing to give up for? Those are the kind of questions that you have to ask yourself. Because, again, somebody has to participate with you in the trade. And if they notice it, if they're watching Blake Griffin and they're noticing those things about him, you can't come and ask for the house. It's one thing if his value was up here, Max, and then it just plummeted. I get your point. But if it is what it is and everybody's seeing it for what it is, how do you then turn around and ask for the house for him?
Like
I don't know if you can get away with that.
But a good GM would get a lot for Blake Griffin back then in terms of another star player. For example, Kevin Durant. Oh, Blake is from there. Kevin Durant wants to change teams, wants to go to a place where he can win. There's a potential trade partner.
But Kevin Durant wouldn't wait. Kevin, hold on, wait a minute.
Okay, fine,
but a bad example.
There were a lot of stars that moved teams, including Paul George, Kevin Durant, Carmelo Anthony, and others. You couldn't have gotten something done before now for a better piece than what they got?
Well, again, if you're looking at it from that perspective and on its face, sure, that's a legitimate question. But they were willing to let go of Blake Griffin. They were willing to leave him. But then Chris Paul decided to up and leave for Houston when they thought they were going to be able to keep him at $200+ million. So all of a sudden, you got to embrace Blake and say, we love you. We never wanted to lose you. There's a whole bunch of things that work with the equation. But I get where you're coming from. I get it.
Yeah, he just posted a really nice message on Twitter, basically thanking Clippers fans, reflecting, and that he's excited to make a run in the East. So that's the good news for him, right, guys? He doesn't have to deal with the gauntlet of the West. But Stephen A. Smith, I know how closely you follow those Washington Wizards, and I have bad news for you, my friend. John Wall is going to be out for a while. We'll tell you how exactly and how this injury happened and how much it's going to hurt the Wizards' playoff hopes this season. And don't forget to tune in all week because we are star-studded for the Super Bowl. Marcus Mariota, Todd Gurley, Travis Kelce will all be joining the show. Stay tuned.
Max Kellerman. Did you know that our show can now be streamed on demand on the ESPN